And a third question is tied in with our second question, which is we've talked about the deep state a lot, but that's the entrenched bureaucracy in DC. And as I pointed out in a different recording recently, overwhelmingly members of the Democratic Party. I mean, openly members give money to the party and so forth. How do we break that? What are the solutions that you suggest in your book? You highlight the problems. What few solutions can you suggest in our limited time here?
Yeah, so I would say there's structural suggestions and then there's technical suggestions. The structural really start with the budget. Day one, we can't just rubber stamp the budget from last year, and this will require some working with Congress and some courage in Congress. But if we win this next election cycle in the ways that we possibly could and bring in some courageous members of Congress to do their job and work with the president, we can very quickly limit the scope of the federal government. I would suggest a day one executive order getting all agencies to submit budgets that cut 30 to 40% and then incentivize additional cuts. So step one is structural, and it's the budget. Step two is including the elimination of offices and full-time employees that do not fit within tangible fulfillment of the agency's mission. At EPA, it's clear, protecting public health and the environment. But I could tell you, David, today there are so many offices that have nothing to do with that, but continue to be a drain on taxpayer resources. And whoever's coming in has the ability to reshape, redraw, and redistribute the resources, the appropriated resources within the agency. And so that is going to be a very important exercise. Also, moving some agencies out of DC. The more we can get bureaucrats or people with a regulatory responsibility closer to the people and entities that they actually impact, the shorter that line of accountability will be and the better the outcomes. So those are a couple of the structural changes. The technical changes, these are things you've likely heard of, but it includes something like Schedule F. I was the chief of staff at EPA when Schedule F was rolled out towards the tail end of the first Trump administration. There's so much potential there, and we really didn't get a chance to implement it for a variety of reasons. We were dealing with COVID, we were dealing with the election, and then the election went the opposite way that we ultimately wanted it to go. But Schedule F is a really important tool. There's also ways to get rid of non-merit-based considerations for hiring, getting rid of the DEI requirements in the federal hiring process, as well as the way that federal agencies award contracts and grants, because that creates a whole other subsidiary industry that we know is in Washington, D.C. And one of the other things I talk a lot about, and I put this in the technical category, but this is breaking the rule of progressivism in Washington, D.C. and the role of government unions. You mentioned this just a second ago, but so your listeners, it's very clear. 96% of all political activity from government unions at the federal, state, and local level go to support Democrat political causes and candidates. That is absolutely backwards. And so we've got to be willing to break apart these unions, ultimately get rid of them. The notion of a public sector union flies in the face of what that should really be about. And it's also inoculated bureaucrats working in Washington, D.C. that do little more than take a taxpayer-funded check home with them, and they don't actually contribute to the betterment of our government or fulfillment of important agency missions. So that's it in a nutshell. I get into a lot more detail, but that's the general take on proposed solutions to this problem. The last thing I'll say is who's going to implement the plan. And this is where personnel on the front end really comes into play, making sure that when we have a chance to have our conservative political appointees make key decisions, that they're walking in with the appropriate training and connections with the people who are going to be working in the same direction as them. Training so they know what tools they have to deal with personnel issues, how the regulatory process works, how to get their badge, some fundamental things, but then some bigger picture things that will make our team of the conservative reset crew super effective from day one.